When you look at international politics, when you look at diplomacy, when you look at negotiation, you've always got to look at what is the main thing that the person across the table is asking you for. That's the main thing. And if you listen to what the Ukrainians have been asking for, well, certainly since, of course, 2022, you have seen it constantly be this very simple one thing. We want security guarantees. Because this Russian invasion didn't start in 2022. It started way back in 2014. And every time there has been, something signed, something given, Russia has broken it. And they feel that without cast iron security guarantees, whatever security deal, ceasefire, etc., they might do is useless. Like completely, absolutely useless. So that's why they keep on asking for it. That's why they keep on asking for this. It is important that they get those security guarantees. And if you cannot understand that, then you cannot even begin to start understanding the position that the Ukrainians currently want when they go into a negotiating position. This is why we've seen recently the talks of, UK and France are going to work with Ukraine. We're going to work on a peace deal. That is then going to be presented to the US. That so far is still the plan. That still seems sort of the plan of action. We'll see what happens when eventually that gets done. Like I say, it's not going to sort of be created overnight, of course. We still don't know any details or anything about that coming out about that. But at the moment, we're still going to sort of wait and see what happens on that. But in the meantime, there was this opinion piece put out in The Guardian. And I think it is worth having a look at it, because I think it is worth understanding that question. Is Europe misunderstanding Trump's position on Ukraine? So have we, as I said at the beginning, have we misunderstood Trump's position on Ukraine? Have we not, crossed our wires somewhere at this point? I don't think we have, because Trump's position on Ukraine has completely flip-flopped constantly, even literally in the past couple of months. Even just last week, when he was visited by Macron, by Starmer, and then you had the events on Friday. Absolute flip-flop. Complete flip-flop. To a point now, you've got Russia coming out and saying, boy, are we really glad that, the USA is coming around to our way of viewing these things, because it's absolutely ecstatic that it's being offered all this land, especially in this deal. So there are a couple other things I think maybe that's worth mentioning, talking about, but maybe we'll talk about those maybe in another video another time. But I do want to sort of have a look at this, because it is a question I think you always need to ask. Have Europeans misunderstood Trump's position on Ukraine? It's a valid question, something we should explore, something that we should know. Now, I'm going to go into this, and I'm going to say now, I don't think we have misunderstood Trump's position on Ukraine at all. I think Trump has been very clear on what he has said about Ukraine. I think you look at the comments that J.D. Vance has made about Ukraine. I think you look at everything else that has come out since. And remember, the number one thing that Ukrainians want is future security guarantees. But the US is still not prepared to give that. And until they get that, I don't think the Ukrainians are going to budge on that, because they want future security guarantees. Because since 2014, as Zelensky tried to point out to Trump and Vance, we've signed so many things, so many deals. Russia's broke it. What's going to be different this time? That is the main thing. That is their main key on that. And that is something we should care about because the Ukrainians are right on that. Why should we trust Putin? This is why, again, going off on a tangent again, but this is why you've seen Emmanuel Macron say, okay, let's have a month's ceasefire. Let's see if Putin is serious about this. He's not, of course. But it's a start. Let's see if Putin is actually serious about peace. Month ceasefire. And that puts the pressure on Putin rather than Ukraine. If you're serious about a ceasefire, Russia, there's a month ceasefire. Let's see how serious you are. So before we do go more into this, please do remember to click on the like, share, and subscribe button. Down below, there are the Patreon page. There's a Buy Me a Coffee link where you can buy me coffee, the YouTube thank you button, and of course, as always, there's the Pony Club down below as well. So let's crack on then into this. So, is Europe misunderstanding Trump's position on Ukraine? Important question. I do think that should be asked. I don't think Europe is misunderstanding position on Ukraine, Trump's position on Ukraine. But it is very, very strange indeed. And obviously the little title is: the new administration appears to be taking a position that Ukraine and European leaders aren't hearing or are trying to alter. I don't think we're not hearing it or trying to alter. I just don't think that is reasonable to ask what they are asking on this. So, a high-stakes transatlantic miscommunication is now unfolding. Don't think it is at all. With the potential now to produce far worse consequences than the Oval Office contemplates between Donald Trump and Volodymyr Zelensky. Well, I think if there is a miscommunication, you should ask what that miscommunication is. And that miscommunication seems to be coming from the White House not communicating with its allies, not actually fundamentally saying what it wants to do, what it wants to achieve. So in the past month, the Trump administration has delivered several strong and sometimes conflicting messages to Americans, allies, and partners in Europe. As I said at the beginning, completely yo-yoing, different positions. What do you mean? You compare this to last administration, which was very clear on what it wanted to achieve, what it wanted to do. So discerning, of course, the signal in the noise isn't easy. But amid the zigs and zags and bombast, the new administration appears to be taking a position that Ukraine and European leaders aren't hearing or trying to alter. I don't think that's the case at all, because what is the Ukraine position? What is the US position on this? And then think about what Europe and even Ukraine are saying in this as well. So the crux of the message seems to be this: the US will either broker an end to the war in Ukraine in short order or remove itself from the conflict, unless perhaps it deems Russia to have obstructed a ceasefire. As Trump told Zelensky on Friday, you're either going to make a deal or we're out. Well, instantly, that is unacceptable. You are trying to essentially speed run an end to this war that is incredibly complex and complicated. Because part of this deal that the Trump administration wants to do is give up land. That land that Russia currently occupies, that's now theirs. Russia may even demand more land in a peace deal. It may demand more. It may demand positions that aren't even currently occupied. And then you have to say, well, what happens to the people who are there? Because you've got two sort of populations there, both, of course, Ukrainian, but you've got Ukrainians that are currently and have been living for the past 3 years under occupation versus those who managed to get out in time. What happens to them? Now, that absolutely should come up in negotiations, but you cannot, and I constantly stress, you cannot just go, there you go. because I guarantee you now, there is going to be a massive, massive diaspora from those occupied territories of the Ukrainians, because I can guarantee you now, a lot of Ukrainians aren't going to want to live under full Russian rule, especially if some of the stuff we've been hearing about going on for the past 3 years is true. And I guarantee you, there are stories and stuff we haven't even heard about yet, which will be, I think, shock the world when it comes out. Generally do think that. But it's one of the conversations you never see come up. And I think it's so annoying when you don't see that conversation come up. Really annoying. Frustrating beyond belief when you see that come up. Anyway, back to this. So, Washington will also refuse to make any commitment to Ukraine's post-war security, such as NATO membership, that would run a major risk of drawing the US into a direct war with Russia, World War III as Trump sees it, if Russia invades Ukraine again. That is exactly the point. Why should Ukraine sign anything when they have signed stuff in the past where Russia has broken it? They want security guarantees. Till they get those, don't think there's going to be any movement on that. Europe knows it as well. Europe is fully on board with security guarantees. That is why they are asking for that as well. The US has the sovereign right to adopt this stance. Yeah, absolutely it does. You are right on that. US is a sovereign state, has every right to accept that, to take that stance. However, that stance is ridiculous. It knows it's ridiculous. Anyway, for the sake of its own interests, which include now limiting the costs and risks to the US, if is now bearing, of course, for European defense. So Europe cannot dissuade the US, but it can work with Washington to achieve US goals while finding the best possible agreement to protect Ukraine, secure Europe, and preserve NATO. So how then do you even protect Ukraine if you are not even going to offer it for future security guarantees? Which is what Ukraine has been asking. It's what Europe has been asking as well. You know, we are prepared. You know, France and the UK are prepared to put troops on the ground. It sounds like as well, Germany and Poland are also in that same position, but they want US backing as well, because they know that will be the biggest deterrent of Russia coming back. So this is where he perceives the Europeans are getting this message wrong. Let's see if, as we've said, that apparently this entire paragraph is the US position. I think that is a terrible position for it to adopt. It doesn't make any sense, doesn't really offer any future security guarantees. And as the big thing and question must always be asked, what is to stop Russia coming back again in 5, 8, 10 years' time and taking more of Ukraine? Because this has been going on since 2014. And they have signed 2 deals, Minsk 1, Minsk 2. Both those deals been broken by Russia. What's going to stop them breaking another deal? Anyway, back to this. European leaders, of course, however, have been hearing a very different message, or at least 2. To be precise, one version is maximally pessimistic, that Europeans fear that Trump is now aligning with Vladimir Putin and preparing to abandon Ukraine and perhaps several more countries besides, which seems to be the case. It seems to be the case. If you are giving Putin everything he wants before you are even going in to start negotiations, how are you meant to pursue that he is not aligning himself with Vladimir Putin and potentially with more abandoning more countries? Because we've already had like stories from Kremlin insiders who have said he now presumes he has the green light to strike other European countries, to go into other European countries. That should be worrying. Very worrying indeed. So it continues. Such an outcome remains possible. Yeah, so why then should we not worry about that? Why should you then not acknowledge that fear? If such an outcome remains possible, why then do you not see the worry and the panic and the fact that lots of now people are now saying the transatlantic alliance is now dead because of Trump? Anyway, so far, however, that has not come to pass. Well, I'll tell you what, this article might age like milk in a hot summer's day if that does come to pass. Anyway, this, of course, initial meeting to reopen diplomatic relations with Russia, and of course, a disturbingly staunch willingness now to condemn Putin's aggression in Ukraine, are significant moves, but they are a long way from engulfing. I can't even say it now. Basically, creating such a grand geopolitical shift. Why not condemn Putin's aggression of Ukraine? Like, why are you so willing to just say, oops, Russia attacked Ukraine, whoopsie doopsie? What? What? You cannot just let this aggression go unpunished or unchecked. Otherwise, what's to stop Putin doing this again in the future, maybe to Ukraine again, or to another European country, or to another one of his neighbors, or another sort of autocratic dictator thinking he can do the same? It's what we've been saying for the longest time. So, the other version is, of course, far more optimistic. European leaders do still have hope to convince Trump to make a major US security guarantee to Ukraine, which is, again, where that hope at least does lie. This effort drove British, French, and Ukrainian leaders to visit the White House last week. In public remarks, all three attempted to sell Trump on providing a US backstop for a European military force involving perhaps some 300,000 troops to be placed in Ukraine once the fighting stops. Trump did not rule out some sort of US support for a European military contingent. But where is the Americans in that? And if you are going to do a deal, bear in mind, Putin, I noticed this guy isn't mentioned this already, but where's Russia on this? What's their stance on this? Their stance so far has been they will not accept any foreign troops. Any foreign troops. What interesting that they're not wanting to accept any foreign troops, because instantly to me, that says that they'll be back. And they don't want to have those foreign troops in the way. Bear in mind, there would be a speed bump, but it would be a speed bump that would trigger further consequences. Just as you see in South Korea or any other time, you see these types of deals put in place. If you go in, there are consequences. So, but he did indicate very little willingness to put much American muscle behind it, saying, I'm not going to make security guarantees beyond very much, Trump said. We're going to have Europe do that. Well, Europe already wants to make security guarantees, but it wants that US support. Otherwise, they think it's not enough. The strongest support is not only to have just the Europeans, but that American backing as well. So, on Friday in the Oval Office, Zelensky contested Trump's stance. The Ukrainian president saltily, Oh no, sorry, stated flatly. Sorry, I thought that's saltily. Sorry, that's my dyslexia kicking in there. Stated flatly, quote, "We will never just accept a ceasefire. It will not work without security guarantees." He is right on that. Zelensky maintained that strong security guarantees had to come from the US, not just Europe. A European military force, he said, would not work unless the US provided significant backstops. They needed the USA. In short, Zelensky has insisted he would not agree to a ceasefire because Russia would not honor it unless the US provided precisely what Trump had already seemingly ruled out. And Zelensky is right. And the fact that either this guy and the Trump administration cannot recognize that means this deal is a non-starter. We already know apparently Trump is complaining that he's not going to get a Nobel Peace Prize because he wants to one-up Obama. Because remember, Obama got a Nobel Peace Prize. Trump wants his own Nobel Peace Prize. But at this rate, he's not getting it. Anyway, so as of course the conversation devolved, Trump eventually threatened to withdraw US aid to Ukraine altogether if Zelensky's position did not change. And again, Zelensky, he's the ruler of a sovereign country. Why should he change his position on this? Like, having US peacekeepers there, a backstop, makes Russia incredibly hesitant to break any deal or any ceasefire that might get put in place. If the Europeans are there, you know, maybe it becomes just a 50-50. If the US is there, they ain't going to do it. So, since Zelensky hasn't budged, to the contrary, he even doubled down, saying, "If we cannot be accepted to NATO," Zelensky wrote in a statement, "we need some clear structure of security guarantees from our allies in the US. Only after such guarantees were an offer would, of course, Ukraine proceed with diplomacy to settle the war." Because again, they want those security guarantees. The biggest thing, and you must keep on stressing this, is that since 2014, there have been deals signed and Russia has broken them every single time. Every single time. And until that gets sorted out, why should it sign anything? It should be incredibly clear at this point, Ukraine does not trust Russia. And it will not trust Russia unless there is significant security guarantees offered. Until that is offered, you can forget about any peace talks. And if that leads to the US then abandoning Ukraine, which would be the biggest betrayal ever in history, then that is on Trump. Not understanding the Ukrainian position, why the Ukrainians are asking for that, and where they're coming from. Because you would think someone who understands the art of the deal, you would have to understand that. But of course he doesn't, because he's a terrible deal maker. So, European leaders promptly then affirmed Zelensky's view. Following a meeting, because they're right, they agree with Zelensky on this one. That's why they've affirmed his view. Following a meeting, 18 leaders on Saturday, Keir Starmer announced that a European coalition of the willing was prepared to station military forces in Ukraine to guarantee the peace. He pledged to put British troops on the ground and planes in the air. On one condition, this effort must have strong US backing. Because they know if that happens, it's not a 50-50 question. It's not a 50-50 question. It's Russia wouldn't dare do it. Like, Russia would just not dare do it. If Europe's there, it will make the calculated cost. Can we either A, take more Ukrainian land at the cost that is going to cost us if Europe is there? Can we fight Europe? Essentially is their question. And that question comes down to a 50-50 coin costs. Whether they think they can or can't do it. If the US is there, all of a sudden they ain't willing to flip that coin. So for years now, officials and experts across the Atlantic have debated the merits of providing security guarantees to Ukraine. But the practical reality is that the Trump administration is not inclined to do so. If not, it would oblige a de jure or de facto. The US would go to war on Ukraine's behalf in the future. That is the position that the President of the United States should be that should, of course, be understandable. That is why they want security guarantees, because they know Russia would never want to go to war with that. None of Trump's predecessors, of course, even made a commitment to fight for Ukraine. Joe Biden explicitly ruled out sending US troops when he saw the Russians' full-scale invasion coming. Nor have any NATO allies come to Ukraine's direct defense. The reason is obvious. It would mean war with Russia, a prospect that NATO allies can still deter regardless of what happens in Ukraine. The thing is, that war with Russia just becomes ever more likely. Because Russia, and especially Putin, has made it clear time and time again, there's a lot of territory still in those European countries they want back. And it comes to a point of what happens the next time. Let's say, I don't know, doesn't matter how it ends. Let's say the Ukraine wars come to an end. But there is no strong security guarantees. There's nothing in place. What's to stop him rattling his saber then and demanding stuff? Why? That's always the ultimate question. That is what a lot of people are asking, and they don't. And this guy doesn't seem to understand that. I think he has a very poor understanding of the situation. Why Europe is asking for this? Why Ukraine is asking for this? Doesn't seem to understand that. So, if Ukraine and Europe continue to push for strong US security guarantees, they have a small chance of succeeding and a larger chance of creating a permanent rupture with Trump. Who cares? Trump's not going to be in the next couple of years, but hey, guarantees the future of future security of Ukraine. They ain't going to, like I say, Russia ain't going to start another conflict with Ukraine as long as Russia, as long as those security guarantees are backed up there. The president could even conclude that his allies just refuse to listen, and even worse, are just trying to entrap him. Throwing up his hands, he could take the very action that Ukraine and Europe most want to avoid, cutting off all US support for Ukraine and making a very dirty deal with Putin. That's what it seems to be happening right now. That almost seems to be exactly what Trump has done now. Anyway, the damage could extend throughout Europe if Trump removes US forces and assets, of course, from the region. So, can this worst case scenario be avoided? A route is still available. The sooner Ukraine and Europe stop fixating on US security guarantees, the sooner they can coalesce with the United States around a viable plan that contains two main provisions. So let's see what this guy's plan for this is. What is Ukraine going to be asked to give up? What is it going to be asked to do? And would these provisions be suitable for Ukrainians? I know I do have a couple of Ukrainians who do watch my channel from time to time. I'd be very interested to hear what you think of these two ideas. So first, post-war Ukraine would remain a very large and technologically advanced military trained and supplied by its Western partners. Second, the US and Europe would commit to arm Ukraine heavily if Russia invaded again. I know it's your thing again. So, because they are doing so now, this commitment would be highly credible. Unlike a historic pledge to wage war on Ukraine's behalf, NATO allies could also sign a legally binding document and stockpile specific weapon systems that could be surged into Ukraine in case of a renewed attack. So, ultimately, what that is we are going to basically arm Ukraine. rather than provide security guarantees, we are going to arm Ukraine to the teeth. But still, what else is going to ask? This formula may fall short of what Ukrainians want, but it may provide what they need. After all, Ukraine's forces have protected the country in the current conflict, preserving 80% of Ukrainian territory and forcing Russia now into a very costly war of attrition. If those forces remain strong, it would hardly be a foregone conclusion that Putin or even a successor would make another attempt, not because the Kremlin can be trusted to keep its word, but because it would suffer enormous losses for very little gain. Well, that's what's happened now. Russia has taken enormous losses for very little gain. What's to stop it trying to do so again in the future? Now, bear in mind, we were already giving arms to Ukraine back since 2014. So this is basically, you go back to you basically maintain the status quo of pre-2022 invasion Ukraine. I don't think the Ukrainians are going to go for that. They've signaled they ain't going to go for that. They ain't going to go for that at all. Even if you do this whole thing of, oh yeah, we're going to stockpile certain weapons, we're going to surge to Ukraine if that case that happens. We've surged weapons to Ukraine during their invasion. You are essentially asking for us to go back to the status quo of 2022 in the hope that Russia doesn't invade again. Why is that acceptable? Because I'll tell you now, a lot of European countries have basically said, yeah, going back to that status quo is not acceptable either. So it's not that Europe is misunderstanding that or wanting to coalesce around that. Why should they take that stance? Why should they risk it when you could have really strong security guarantees that mean Russia would never dare mess with Ukraine again? That's what they are asking. That is what they keep on asking for. That is what Europe wants as well. It is not that Europe is misunderstanding the situation. Trump is misunderstanding the situation. The Trump administration is misunderstanding the situation. So let's finish this off then. Ukraine and, of course, Europe and the US must then use their leverage at the negotiating table to get Russia stopping fighting without requiring Ukraine to disarm. Again, Russia's top goal is to disarm Ukraine. They are still asking for that, by the way. Russia might, of course, acquiesce, having kept Ukraine out of NATO and NATO and its members' forces out of Ukraine. They don't care about that. Like this whole idea, keeping, we had to invade because Ukraine was about to join NATO or whatever. Don't care about that. It's about land. It's about the power. And even if they do keep them out of Ukraine, great. We can come back again and not have to worry about, future stuff. Oh yeah, doesn't matter because last time we, managed to take this much land, well, guess what? We'll just do it again in a couple of years when we're even maybe better, more prepared. Once again, misunderstanding why the Ukrainians and why the Europeans want those strong security guarantees. Because if that is there, doesn't matter. Russia would never mess with Ukraine. Never mess with Ukraine on that. So, to reach a deal, however, the transatlantic community should come together post haste to throw its weight behind a common demand. They have done that. They have done that. They've literally done that on Sunday. Anyway, To do so otherwise is now to cut disaster not only for Ukraine, but for European security as a whole, which basically says to me, Stephen Wertheim, a fellow in American statecraft program, and Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, and the author of Tomorrow, the World, Tomorrow, the World, the Birth of U.S. Global Supremacy. Yeah, that basically seems to me the whole Trump administration, the whole idea, what they said, they do not care about European security. They do not care about our security. Why should we care then about America's? What they care about. Why not just have more nuclear weapons across, Europe? Because it was NATO. It was the nuclear sharing agreements that America signed that reduced the number of nuclear weapons across Europe. Sweden had a nuclear weapons program, I think, right up until I think at some point in like the 1970s is where they cancelled it. I'm not exactly sure when, but I think it was around like the 1970s. Why shouldn't Ukraine have nuclear weapons? After all, it gave up its nuclear weapons in return for security guarantees to, both the UK and the US in the promise that, it would defend Ukraine should Russia come and invade. The Budapest Memorandum. Right now, we are honoring it. I think Keir Starmer announcing even more support for Ukraine. The deal he's announced is basically that UK companies are now going to build even more air defense systems for Ukraine. Can we do more? Absolutely. But I do think, of course, in the avoidment of potentially going to war, you have to look at, is it inevitable? Can we get to a situation where we are ready? But I'll tell you now, I don't think these talks are going to work. I think Trump is going to blame Zelensky. And then I think he'll abandon Ukraine. I really worry that is why we're headed. And then war becomes ever more likely. Ever more likely. So, as always, thank you very much for watching. Let me know what you think down below as well. And of course, as always, we'll see you all next time.